What's going on, guys? I know most of you are here for the live stream that we do every Monday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Had something to take care of away from my desk this week. It's going to be shuffling around a little bit with the guests. Obviously, Locks of the Week with Jake Seeley is already up on the channel, so check out that video if you haven't already. I recorded this segment that you're about to see with Matt Harmon yesterday, but I will see you guys at the normal time on Sunday at 9 a.m. for the big show. Now let's get into the episode. We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. 4 trending wide receivers for NFL Week 9. Players that everyone is talking about and how we can use those narratives to find an edge at the most important position in fantasy football and in DFS. Obviously, there's no one out there that I'd rather talk wide receivers with than our next guest. You guys know from Yahoo Sports, Reception Perception, obviously his new YouTube channel. Want to make sure that you guys get over there and check out all the good information on that channel. So if you do go over and subscribe to Harmon, definitely let me know in the comments if you do that. Might do some sort of giveaway at some point for those people that go over there. Matt, how we doing, my man?
I appreciate it, buddy. I appreciate all the support that you send my way here on the YouTube. But no, man, things are good. It's a wild week of NFL news, that's for sure. Just trying to keep up with everything. But hey, man, week 9, like we're kind of in that inflection point of the season where, you know, it's way past time to start making those adjustments for the second half of the year. And this is always, I think, the most fun time of the fantasy season is as we start to turn the clock from the middle towards the end of it.
Yeah, this time of year we have a little bit more data to kind of lean into, which is nice, but this is also the time of year where teams start to get a little bit less healthy as well. So things are happening. Obviously, we still have COVID implications. I said this with Jake that we recorded earlier. Thank God this information from Green Bay came out before we recorded these, obviously a little bit earlier than usual this week. But yeah, not having the Rodgers news and then doing these would have not been so fun. So before we jump into it, is there anyone that you think benefits, I guess, at all? I don't even know if it's really a benefit, but I guess who does this affect the most not having Aaron Rodgers? I mean, against Kansas City, this is going to be one of the most popular points of the game, or one of the most popular games on the entire slate. So any thoughts on that? Or the complete avoid now?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a complete avoid. Maybe for daily fantasy, just because, like, I mean, if you have Devontae Adams on your season-long team, you know, provided that he's cleared in time to play, because as we're taping this right now, that hasn't been fully decided yet. But provided he's out there, I think he's right around in terms of like points per game, like a wide receiver 12, 13-ish guy when Aaron Rodgers hasn't played the last few years. But obviously, most of that is not in like the peak form of Devontae Adams. So that's also worth noting there too. I wouldn't freak out about him if you have him in your season-long league. You know, Jordan Love is going to get a great soft landing spot here against a very bad Kansas City defense. We are going to really learn something about him in this week. That is for sure. But I mean, you know, Green Bay already was suffering through a ton of, you know, COVID issues, as you mentioned, but also injuries too. Bob Tonyan out for the season after Thursday night last week. So, you know, this is just a tough break for the Packers. I think maybe A.J. Dillon becomes more interesting if they try to do like a ground and pound type of situation. We know that Green Bay is totally okay doing that. I think Dillon has looked good on balance this year, but yeah, it's not good news for any of the pass catchers, that's for sure.
All right, let's talk about some good news, and it's always good news when you're playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars. The first wide receiver we're going to talk about today is Emmanuel Sanders. He's 6,500 on FanDuel. And Harmon, last week, obviously had a decent amount of this Buffalo offense, a lot of Stephon Diggs, also had some Sanders, and that goose egg looks a little bit worse than it probably should, right? Because he was getting some of those deeper targets like he always does, and man, he just seems like one of those guys that hasn't really dropped off, but might be a nice buy low opportunity for him.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful buy low spot. You mentioned it, the matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars. You know, last week we saw, hey, life can be pretty good for Geno Smith when he doesn't have to play the Saints or the Steelers, you know, some of the top secondaries, top defenses overall in the entire NFL. And it's basically the complete other side of the token with Jacksonville. I mean, they are an awful pass defense. They're 32nd in explosive play rate allowed through the air. I think it's just a great spot for Emmanuel Sanders, who, as you mentioned, has continued to get vertical looks throughout the season. And that is somewhat surprising for a guy his age, but, you know, for a player like Sanders, so much of what makes him good is, you know, technique, refined route running. Like over and over again, he has just demonstrated that even if he's a slight tick down from the explosive athlete that he was at early points of his career, the fact that he can still get down the field is just basically a testament to his great route running and the technique that he brings here. So I think it's a great bounce back spot for the entire Jacksonville Jaguars, the entire Bills offense against this Jacksonville Jaguars defense, and that certainly trickles down to Sanders. Even after putting up a straight 0 last week, I'd be completely comfortable going back to him in this spot.
Yeah, I mentioned kind of leading into the data a little bit more now that we have a lot more of it. And over the last 3 weeks, Emmanuel Sanders actually higher weighted opportunity rating than Stephon Diggs, and obviously getting a huge salary discount there. So love that Sanders call. Let's move on, obviously, to I guess a completely brutal situation at basically every level with Henry Ruggs. Obviously, our hearts and deepest condolences go out to the family members involved. Just absolutely tragic. But Harmon, I'm going to awkwardly transition this, but Brian Edwards, one of your guys. So let's, I guess, give you an opportunity to talk about maybe the fantasy implications here and why a lot of people might be going the Renfrew route this week, but Brian Edwards is one of those guys that you're really high on.
Yeah, I mean, listen, obviously, it's no easy way to transition from this whole Henry Ruggs situation to talking about what's going on the field. But we know that these two guys in Renfrow and Edwards have played pretty defined roles. You know, Renfrow is, I think, a really underrated player. You know, like his 2019 reception perception looks like just a classic slot receiver that you can throw out there if you're running a high paced, a really, passing friendly offense that you can just throw to 100 times in the slot and get pretty good production. It looks like that's pretty much what's going to happen here with the Raiders this year. So I don't mind him at all. Like, definitely not a bad play. You're probably going to get potentially 8 to 10 targets a week now with Ruggs off the board. But if you're looking for who's going to replace Henry Ruggs from a vertical standpoint, it's definitely Brian Edwards. I mean, 29 targets on the year, 35 for Henry Ruggs. He is almost exclusively run as an outside receiver, but his ADOT is not quite as absurd as like Henry Ruggs, who was up there north of 17 yards. But Brian Edwards is 15.9 ADOT. Like, he has been getting those vertical looks as well, and I think he wins in the downfield area very differently than Henry Ruggs. Ruggs is all speed. It's all the explosiveness there. With Brian Edwards, it's definitely, I think he's a pretty juiced up athlete as well, but he is a ball winning X receiver, very different than the Z receiver that they've previously had there. So I think this is a pretty interesting spot for them to get Brian Edwards going, who, at different points of the year has flashed big time playmaking ability, but is not consistently being targeted. He's kind of fourth in that pecking order when it goes from Waller to Ruggs to Renfrow. Now, obviously, he's going to have to be counted on for more because, you look at the rest of the guys on that roster, nobody else really profiles as a vertical receiver. You've got Zay Jones, they released Willie Snead there. So this is really a spot where I think Edwards can get going. It's not the worst matchup in the world either. I definitely think he's a guy worth considering definitely pretty much every week until the price catches up.
Yeah, one of the comparables that I saw for Brian Edwards was Corey Davis. Would you agree with that at all? I know he's not, like you said, he's not like that field stretcher, but a little bit of a bigger body. Is there someone else that comes to mind that people could? I understand that people know about Brian Edwards, but we still we don't talk about him as much as we probably should have. So I like to give people some sort of comparable if you have one in mind.
Yeah, I thought from kind of a best case scenario, he could be a lot of what Michael Crabtree was for Derek Carr early in his career. You got to remember Derek Carr back in that 2016 season. There were times in the fantasy world where we were all weeping and moaning about the fact that Amari Cooper wasn't getting as many targets as Michael Crabtree. That's because Crabtree was always a pretty reliable guy off the line of scrimmage. That was an area where Amari Cooper struggled as the Raiders' X receiver because he can't really win against press coverage consistently. That's why the Cowboys move him from the Z receiver to the slot receiver spot. Now they've really identified a great usage plan for Amari Cooper there. But Crabtree was a guy who could get off the line quickly, could win in contested areas, was a savvy route runner overall. I think Edwards is probably not quite there yet, but I think that makes sense. The Corey Davis comparison's not the worst one in the world either, because I wouldn't say that Corey Davis is number one receiver. The Jets paid him a lot of money in free agency, but it was still around the 18th, 20th most in terms of per year wide receiver salary. So right around that sort of number 2 wide receiver market. That's actually probably not the worst comparison in the world. Another guy who can win downfield, but it's not necessarily because he's a great route runner or anything like that.
Nice. By the way, everyone, I can see on the back end that over half of you guys watching these videos are not subscribed. So by the end of this video, hopefully we can finally win you over. And if you miss these live streams, you're definitely going to want to hit that notification bell so you know when the next one drops officially. Harmon, the next guy we're going to talk about is someone that I think we've touched on a decent amount this year, but honestly, he gets forgotten still, and I'm not exactly sure why. Mike Williams, he's 7,300 on FanDuel against Philly this week. Tell us why you like him.
Well, I mean, it's probably for good reason lately he's been like on an absurd cold streak.
Sure.
Same with the entire Chargers offense. I think when you look at the Chargers right now, there is like there's some structural issues with this team overall. We know that Brandon Staley is totally comfortable calling a defense that basically begs you to run. Come on, just establish the run on us. It's no big deal as long as like we limit explosive passing plays, all that stuff. It's like very analytically forward thinking to play like that. But you can't be the stone worst run defense of the entire NFL if you're gonna play that style of defense, which is basically what the Chargers have been. And I think it puts them behind the eight ball on the offensive side too, because then you are asking, then you're asking Justin Herbert, who has been incredibly efficient on third and fourth down. Going into last week, he was top 5 in EPA on later downs. You're asking him to run that hot all the time because you're playing not in consistently positive game scripts because teams are just running on you. Anyways, not to get too dorky and all this, but I think that's probably why over the last 2 weeks, in addition to just facing tough defenses in Baltimore and New England, who will come up and play physical coverage on wide receivers, that's probably a part of why Justin Herbert has not played well. And then that's trickled down to Mike Williams. Also might have been a little banged up in that Baltimore game coming off the bye. I was expecting more things, but still just 5 targets, 10 over his last 2 games here. But I mean, what a gorgeous bounce back spot for Mike Williams. He gets an Eagles defense that allows the highest completion rate in the league. They're sort of similar on the other side to LA is like, they don't really play great run defense because their linebackers are just terrible. I mean, like Howie Roseman, come on, like draft a good linebacker for once, like sign somebody at the position, figure it out. They don't play good run defense and they play soft coverage on that side. They're one of the most zone heavy teams in the entire NFL. Mike Williams, like, they have not really tried to make use of him as a vertical receiver as previous Chargers coaching staffs has, which got us all juiced up early in the season because his ADOT was right around that 9-10 mark. I kind of think they could make more use of him as a vertical threat. I think that offense needs somebody to challenge down the field. It looks like everything is way too condensed in the short to intermediate areas. But if they're going to continue to use Williams like that, this is a great matchup for a team, like I said, that allows the highest completion percentage in the league, does play that soft coverage where they could really get going with a lot of layup targets here. I expect Mike Williams to, approach 8 to 10 targets in this game and have a pretty nice outing.
All right, before we continue, I want everyone to jump in the comments. After you've subscribed to Harmon's channel, I want you to also let me know your favorite wide receiver play under 6K going into week 9. And this is one of these guys that we were definitely kind of put into that bucket, and he's someone coming back from injury. And you have to sometimes take a chance on these guys before we actually see it. So Michael Gallup is 5K on FanDuel. It does look like Dak is going to be full go even in practice on Thursday. So decent chance, I guess, to get in early on Michael Gallup. What do you think, Harmon?
Yeah, it's definitely a chance to get in early, man. And I want to see, I kind of want to take a week before we get in here with Michael Gallup. But at the same time, I think the biggest question is how are they going to line up these receivers? Because if there's been one thing that's changed from this Cowboys offense based on what we expected it to be all, 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, but they've gone 2 tight end sets a lot. Kellen Moore has had like offensive linemen lining up in the backfield, really creative run schemes overall that I think are mostly, his design, not Mike McCarthy's design there. So I want to see how they reincorporate Michael Gallup here. And, especially because through his absence, it's not as if they've moved Amari Cooper to like a 50+% slot receiver. It's not as if they've moved CeeDee Lamb back to that position, which is what he played as a rookie. They've been throwing Cedric Wilson out there as a slot receiver. Like, if we get Michael Gallup, who was supposed to be running more routes from the slot this year, according to the training camp buzz, according to his own kind of account of how things might be going, if we get him running like 50+% routes from the slot, we could really see him take off in that role because, last year, the biggest problem with him and why he was like an inconsistent producer, even when Dak Prescott was healthy in 2020 was, they were strictly using him as a vertical X receiver, strictly using him as a guy to win in that X receiver spot. Like, if they can move all 3 of these guys around, I think it'll actually help offset some of the volume concerns because there are legit volume concerns once these 3 guys are all out there. Like, you could see Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and even definitely Michael Gallup pop up for like 4 or 5 target games with the way that Dalton Schultz is broken out, with the way that, these 2 guys are target hogs. Gallup's a really good player and they can run the ball really well. So, I personally wouldn't mind taking a week with Michael Gallup, but that value is definitely tempting. As long as we get Dak Prescott back out there, obviously that's the big caveat here.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of risk involved with this one, but you should be able to get a decent amount of leverage off of obviously some of the Raiders' cheaper wide receivers, and honestly, even like Jacoby Myers, if people are still going back to that. Well, this is the week. Hashtag this is the week.
Buddy, this is he's a 2-point conversion monster now at this point. Like it's almost it has to be a troll job, right? Like he keeps getting these 2-point conversions, but never mind on that one. Just last thing on the Cowboys too. This matchup against the Broncos, like we thought this might be a really tough defense. Obviously, we know they traded Von Miller, but even before that, like they're so depleted over there. Are the Denver Broncos? Like I don't know that this is one of those situations where I would be that gassed up about the wide receivers, even though the wide receiver cornerback matchups are going to look really good because they basically aren't even playing Kyle Fuller anymore. They've just kind of moved on from that. He was a guy that they discussed moving at the deadline, but didn't really have any takers there. Patrick Surtain has been a little banged up, and obviously he's still a rookie as well. It's a great matchup for these wide receivers, but I could also see a situation where like Dallas gets an early lead here and just nurses the clock with Zeke, with Pollard behind that offensive line. So like this is the question we're going to ask ourselves with these Cowboys receivers every single week is basically once we know where they all line up and we're going to get those clues on Sunday, then let's talk about matchups after that.